Welcome to Build Your Best Business. I'm your host, Eric Holtzclaw. Build Your Best Business focuses on the entrepreneurial journey. What does it take to successfully start, manage, and eventually exit and grow a business? I'm talking today with John Osborne. Correct? Yes.
Correct.
John Osborne. I think I, for some reason, felt like it was different. So, John Osborne, he's the founder of the Harbor Entrepreneur Center, and we're coming to you from Charleston, South Carolina, courtesy of Sea Change. They're letting us use their space and interview some people here in the Charleston area. So, John, first tell us a little bit about the Harbor Entrepreneur Center.
Yeah, the Harbor is definitely a passion and stemmed from a need that we saw in the market. But what it actually does is we offer an accelerator program like a lot of communities have for startups, which is a 14-week initiative for 8 companies at a time that are looking to grow and scale and move their business forward. We grew from that first accelerator program, which is how we started, into a full-on center, which offers multiple programs for entrepreneurs, anywhere from I got a total idea and I just need a place to get some feedback on the idea, to I have a business that's working, to even forum groups where you have to have at least $250,000 in revenue and 3 employees to join a group. And so at this point we work with 170 plus companies in the area and that are involved in a program in one way or another. And we just announced a new 5-year home. So we signed a deal to have a 5-year lease on 7,000 square feet in the new Pacific Box and Crate development. So if you're familiar with the area, this development was just written up in the New York Times and the USA Today. It's getting a lot of accolades for it's got a campus feel to it and is something pretty unique to this market, and we're really excited about being there.
So being in Charleston, we're originally from Atlanta, but spent a lot of time in Nashville and other cities and things. And so every city sort of has their own vibe, you know, the thing that's going on. So 170 companies are participating. Are there patterns to the type of companies here?
Some are starting to emerge, and if you really dive into it, it starts to make sense in that the pillar of specifically the technology sector here, those institutions are Blackbaud, Benefit Focus, Automated Trading Desk. That's really your Mount Rushmore of who was here 25 years ago and became the nucleus of what is now our tech sector. So it's not, it's a little obvious to make a correlation to say the employees that worked at Benefit Focus that are familiar with HR technology, that industry, might spin off and start their own company that is in that sector. So we're certainly seeing HR tech and as a cluster that's starting to emerge. And then because of Blackbaud, similarly, the nonprofit sector and sort of social enterprise tends to be something that you're starting to see cluster here in the region.
Okay, yeah. And so thinking about it, how did you get into this? So, and when we said that you were founder of Harbor Entrepreneur Center, you've got multiple things going on too, I'm sure.
Yes. I got into it really as part of my own entrepreneur journey, and I was in banking finance for 10 years. Okay. I was there in 2008 when the downturn happened. It was really interesting to be in the financial markets at that time. Then in 2012, when the Jobs Act passed, I saw how that legislation was going to impact the financial markets, specifically crowdfunding, and how companies were going to be able to raise money with general solicitation and use online platforms to go out and raise money. And I thought this is going to be a game changer for companies looking for capital to grow, where my previous world was the bank side. They were out of that game. There was going to be another way for companies to get money. So I started building crowdfunding platforms in 2012, right after the Jobs Act passed, and learned a really good lesson about market timing. Yeah. You know, right now, we're 2017, you say crowdfunding, people are like, yeah.
Yeah, I know what that is, yeah.
2012, you say crowdfunding, people are like, what are you talking about? So, but what it did is it put me right in the conversation with both companies that were looking for money and then investors and people that were looking to invest in companies. It became clear through that journey that there needed to be some place to help bring the level of sophistication up for companies that were asking for money. And the Harbor became a solution to really that problem. So in 2014, co-founder Patrick Bryant and I, essentially you mentioned Nashville, we specifically went to Nashville and we talked to the gentleman that started the Nashville Entrepreneur Center, Michael Bircham and Sam Lingo, and said, hey, we're just two dudes at the bar. We don't have this 20,000 square feet amazingness that you guys do. Take us back to those days, and what did you do to get this thing going? And they were really gracious to go ahead and give us sort of a playbook of how they got it going, that we said we're not that much smarter than anyone else. Let's just follow that playbook and see if it works.
Yeah.
And it started to work. So in 2014, we launched the first accelerator program and then been building it from there.
Yeah, and so you talked a minute ago about something that's really important in this area. You know, often when people think about entrepreneurship or starting a business, one of the first conversations is raising money, you know, either from friends and family or investors, angel investors, whatever. And being an entrepreneur doesn't mean that you know all of this stuff, right? Like, in fact, you may have started the business because you saw a problem that needed to be addressed, or you just didn't like your job, whatever it is.
Yep.
And then you get into this place where you think you need to raise money, but the sophistication isn't always there, right? To have that conversation.
Yep. And I mean, I am guilty as charged. You know, I was one when I quit the bank, I had not done my first customer discovery interview. I had not written a line of code. I just quit cold turkey and said, I'm going to go start building this thing. You know, looking back, if I knew now, I would have done it a little differently. I would have started doing some things on the side before I just cut off that income stream. And then I ended up raising some money from people that didn't know what they were doing either, and saw how that played out. So it was, you know, that experience definitely, you know, I can leverage as we talk to the companies that are in the program. But I use the analogy all the time. I played golf in college, which is how I got here. And for me, getting money, it's like now you're in the game. Like you just got your caddy and your clubs, and you're on the first tee box, and you're in the tournament. You haven't won yet. That is not the end game. Now you just get the chance to play. Yeah. So money is a tool to go get resources. That it's a readily transferable tool, but there are other ways that you can go get those same resources to go build your business. And if you're not thinking about what you need to actually build the business, money really doesn't do you any good.
Well, and you alluded to the concept of smart money. You know, I've looked at a couple of deals where people who knew how to invest in something else, so let's say they knew how to invest in real estate, and all of a sudden they start investing in technology, and the rules for investing in real estate are different from the rules of technology, and there's a difference in how that return is expected too. So knowing even the source, like who are you getting it from? Do they understand what it's going to look like and how it's going to be used? Just because they have it doesn't mean you should take it.
That's right. That's right. And if you don't know how you're going to deploy it, and then it's going to come back, then that probably isn't a good time to take it either. You know, keep in mind when, you know, I sit on the investor side now too, and when I invest and we invest, I expect it to come back. So
come on, it's not just monopoly money,
right? No, I mean donations, they have their place,
right? This is not a charitable contribution.
Yeah, so we're looking for this to come back.
Well, and an important thing that was told to me years ago, somebody said about investors' money, is investor had to earn that money. Like they got that money somehow, right? So they had to work hard, they had to do something right to get that money in their bank account, and now you're just asking them to hand it over, right? Yeah.
So it is, and that was part of what we wanted to bring to the market with the harbor was, you know, just being able to leverage the experience of people that have been around here that learned lessons the hard way, and we were really validated with the concept of the harbor when we went out to our first ask of mentors. Because our mentor criteria is you have to have started a business from 0 to over $1 million in revenue. If you're not an individual that took idea and got the first $1 million in the door, love you, but we need that skill set as our guiding light for these early stage startups. So when we got 24 of those to say yes in 2 weeks that they would agree to mentor and spend their time, which is really their most valuable asset at that point, we knew we were onto something. And the reason that a lot of them do it is they wish they would have had that kind of guidance and support when they were doing it. A lot of them did it just grit and hard work and didn't have these kinds of startup ecosystem wasn't a term when they did it. Incubator wasn't a thing when they did it.
No.
And they just blazed the trail. And we're fortunate that now you have a lot of people that are willing to pay it forward and help the aspiring entrepreneurs learn the lessons that they learned the hard way.
Yeah. We talk about that. When I was doing this in the 90s, there were 6 companies being incubated at the only incubator we had in the city. And now we have thousands of them being incubated in 5 or 6 of them, right? So it was a very different thing to try to do it then. Yeah. And you had decided to step out at a time when others were, when they thought you were insane. So, well, you decided to do this, you obviously know what you're doing. Like you almost had to play the bravado to then figure out how to make it work, right? Yeah. At least these ecosystems start to exist now, so you can tap into them and try to figure out how to get to the next level.
That's right.
Yeah. So some things that you see, or what are some of the first pieces of advice, or what gets somebody into your program to begin with? Like, how do I have to qualify?
Yeah. The criteria that we evaluate from specifically to the accelerator is innovation, scale, and ability to execute.
So now innovation, scale, ability to execute.
Correct. Okay. If there's subcategories to that, but overarching, that's what we're looking at. And innovation, is it unique, somewhat different? Can we, if you apply and you tell me you're the only one doing it, and I can do a 25-second Google search and find 6 of them, then we have a problem.
A mistake, right?
Yeah. But yeah, are you doing something somewhat unique? Is it a scalable model? And again, there's plenty of businesses out there, and this is an important distinction I think around entrepreneurship right now. The conversation is, there are plenty of businesses out there that are service-based, that are great businesses, and you can make good money on it, and entrepreneurs run those. Innovation is different and scalable is different. And when you talk about venture capital and trying to look for investors, they're not interested necessarily in funding your startup accounting firm.
Right. And there's much simpler ways to do that.
That's right. So understanding, the scalable business model, and that's what we're looking for in the accelerator. And there's other support systems out there if you want to start maybe a more traditional business model, which is great. And then a team. Is this team capable of actually pulling it off?
Yeah.
And do they have both the capacity? Our accelerator might be a little different in that you already have to have a minimum viable product and be working on it full time. So it can't be just a side hustle idea that you're going to work with for 14 weeks. Like we want, because we just have limited resources, we're going to work with those that are already committed, and they're all in, and they're going to make it a go of it.
And that number 3, that team, when I talk with investors often, that's number 1 for them. They'll say it, and then they're like, team, like they can pivot around it. If I've got the right team in place, then I know we can make it. We're going to go to commercial break. When we get back, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that, if somebody's out there thinking they're about to ask for money or that they need money, what does that look like? How do they get tapped in? What are some of the trends you're seeing? Why might I choose a place like Charleston over a city like Atlanta? So it's kind of a different ecosystem. Like, what does that look like? Other than the fact that we're near a beach and lots of great restaurants and no traffic, but whatever. Okay, we'll be back in just a second. You're listening to Build Your Best Business. I'm your host, Eric Holtzclaw. We're talking with John Osborne. He is founder of the Harbor Entrepreneur Center. Back in just a minute. Being asked what kind of mistakes and lessons have I learned along the way, one of the things I liked about the experience I had in the 90s is I got to work for a bunch of what I call crazy CEOs. So I got to see the things that they did that I agreed with, and the things maybe that I didn't. And that helped me form companies in the future and figure out how to work with others. I was a terrible boss in the 90s. I thought I could change people.
And one of the biggest things I learned is that people do not change. If someone is not detail-oriented, they will never be detail-oriented. You can do a quarterly review with them and say, hey, next time you need to be more detail-oriented. If that's important to the job, you got to fire the person and move on. If it's not important to the job, if they do other things well, then you support them with someone else in the company who is detail-oriented. So if they send out emails with mistakes, you make sure that they send them through it. And it sounds like I'm saying you coddle someone and say, oh, you can't fix your mistakes. You have to understand and be aware of what they do well. So, and tap into that. And for your company, if they are useful, if there's something that they do well, then use them for that. Make them empowered. Don't make them do things they don't do well. They'll put it off to the end. They'll do it poorly. So understanding that, really looking at the team, who they are, and building a team is not about a job description. It's about building a patchwork quilt. So you'll find one person who's very good at one thing, and then you now need to support other things along the way. And it's not hard skills, it's more around the soft skills. Someone that's good at building the team, being collaborative, maybe sharing bad news, and then you put that person in front when you need that for your business. So the art of putting together a good team and understanding how to motivate them towards a goal is probably the biggest thing I've learned.
And we're back. You're listening to Build Your Best Business. I'm your host, Eric Holtzclaw. We're coming to you from Charleston, South Carolina, courtesy of Sea Change. We're using their offices this week to get some in-person interviews in the lovely city of Charleston, and maybe we'll get a chance to pop over to the beach at some point and see the ocean. So talking today with John Osborne. He's founder of the Harbor Entrepreneur Center. Has about 170 companies at different stages, either having gone through their accelerator program or just accessing the resources, which is good growth. You guys have been around how many years now?
3 years.
3.
Yeah.
That's pretty
3
good.
and a half. Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't have guessed, and I don't mean this offensively, but I wouldn't have guessed 170 companies in a group like that here.
We might not have guessed it either when we started, but that was when we started it. It was a really cool feeling because we just knew that we struck a chord with the market. There was pent up demand for something like this, and then people just started emerging themselves out of the woodwork, and we're here. That they came off the beach and they started showing up.
Right. Well, I mean, in that work-life balance, I mean, I'm proudly from Atlanta. I've been in Atlanta my entire life, but love all the kind of surrounding southern cities, Nashville and Charleston, because there's just a different pace, better work-life balance. I mean, we have terrible traffic. Atlanta's traffic is just the worst, right? So as you think about sort of being in an area like a secondary city like Charleston, no offense, don't mean it offensively.
Sure.
What are some of the things you guys see maybe missing in the ecosystem? Work-life balance is definitely a plus for you over a place like in Atlanta, but what are some things that you guys still need?
Well, if you don't like the beach and the good restaurants and the attractive people and the great climate, and if that isn't doing it for you,
if that's not enough, right?
And I use the analogy in our ecosystem right now that it's like we're in our early adolescent phase. So we talked a little bit earlier about those pillar institutions that blaze the trail, the Blackbaud, Benefit Focus, Automated Trading Desk. Now you've got another contingency of startups that have grown and even exited or raised. I know about $100 million worth of venture capital that's been invested the last 3 years in deals here. So it's like we're at the junior high dance and we just are figuring out like where our hands go and how this is going to work. And, things are starting to emerge. And over the next 10 years, some of those awkward 14-year-olds turn into really sexy 24-year-olds. And I'm convinced that, we're just on that trajectory. And the thing, to answer your question, that I feel like will help the ecosystem mature is we continue to see sort of the sophistication level of the senior executive talent that we're fortunate in Charleston that they're around in the periphery and they're hanging out at the beaches and they're in their second career here. And there's a lot of talent and network and experience that we can tap into that maybe other markets aren't as fortunate to have. The other is the corporate connection, right? When you have an Atlanta market, you've got significant corporate presence. Here in Charleston, now we do have Boeing and Blackbaud, of course, publicly traded, but Mercedes, Volvo. So you start to see some large corporate global brands having a presence here that I think will assist that next chapter in how we develop.
Yeah, and it's been interesting because I've hung out here for years. I think first year of Dig South was the first time I sort of got exposed to this as a market. And I run into a lot of what I would call like West Coast people who've moved back to Charleston. You know, the lifestyle's easier, it's not as expensive.
Right.
So you got some powerful people kind of hanging out who then still want to give back. Like they're not done, right?
That's right.
It just means that they wanted to do something different.
Yeah. And I totally agree. And that's very consistent with what is happening. And they don't want a 90-hour-a-week gig.
Right.
But they also don't want to watch birds and play golf all day, every day.
Right.
So there's a healthy balance for them of how they can be involved and supportive. And, that's where, again, I just go, we have to continue to harness that and mature it and systematize how people get into making that efficient as an ecosystem. The nice part about it too is as entrepreneurs, right, we like to create things. If it's too baked out, we kind of go, okay, like
there's a system.
Yeah,
we're following the rules, right? Yeah.
And right now, the market is small enough that you can get to anyone. You can have the conversation between John upstairs and John sitting here and Stan Gray at Dig South and a handful of others. Like you can get to a lot of people in town, and everybody's of the mindset we're all in this together. So it's a really fun time to create it because you can still put your stamp on how this develops. There's no significant institutions that are here that are going to block people out of being involved in the ecosystem because we're all in it together.
Yeah, all in it together. And I no matter if you're classically Southern or not, and I am classically Southern, when you get to the South, we sort of expect relationship. Like we want to know who you are. We want to break bread with you. Like those are things. And I'll talk to someone who may be new to the market and they say, I've been to the networking event a couple times, or I've done this thing and I really haven't got anything from it. And I'm like, that's because we got to know you're going to keep showing up, right? Like we got to know you.
Yeah.
And then once we do, then that's what happens, right?
Sure.
But we want to, like, we like the relationship, but we're not. And that's a difference from other markets that I've seen. One I like, but it does change people's often when they kind of come into that market trying to figure out how to fit.
Right.
Yeah. So as you think about companies that are coming and starting to look for money, you hear about the classic, I need a business plan and I got to put together a nice pitch and I need to put together the pro forma, which I can make a spreadsheet say anything.
Right.
So whatever. What are some of the other things that you see people, the things that they don't think about or don't do well, or you have to really educate them on?
Yeah. I think the biggest trend I see there that I'd like to see shift is more of the conversation being about, and more of the presentation and pitch being about, what the market is saying about what you're doing, and firsthand experience. So I started I skipped over a little part of my background. In 2010, I decided to start a financial planning and insurance practice here. It's my dad's work, been doing it for 35 years. I said, let's open a East Coast office of the finance. If anyone recalls 2010, I might have been like the second worst time in our country's history to try and work on any financial planning process, right? I mean, it was an awful environment.
Right.
I was living so much in my own head about, I just spent this career in banking. I had this network. I'm like, I wanted to do my own thing. So this is what I knew, and I was just going to go do it. Completely ignoring how awful the market conditions were to try and do this, and burn through $100,000 of my own money to try and figure that all out. So what I would encourage folks to do is really tell me why, and tell investors why the market is right for this and why they care about it. Because if you're doing it, I expect you to be passionate and I expect you to, want to do it and have an idea.
Drinking the Kool-Aid.
Right.
Yeah, right.
I want to see the market cares about it as much as you do.
Yeah. And that they're listening to what they're hearing.
That's right.
There's often that kind of, well, that's just them, or they don't understand it, or whatever, right? And occasionally, like unicorn, that works.
Occasionally. Sometimes, and if that's you, that's amazing. And congratulations. But I really, the majority, and this is the other part about it, sort of we were talking a little bit off air about the glamorization of entrepreneurship right now. And frankly, the majority of businesses that get created, they're doing real stuff for real industries, and they may not be billion-dollar companies, but they could be $30, $40 million companies, and everybody can win there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Investors can win when getting in early enough. The founders can win. Everybody can win there. So it's okay if it's not and I think that's a bigger difference between sort of what's happening in the Southeast versus, West Coast and maybe even New York market, right? Where the VC firms out there have so much money, it has to be $1 billion idea or in order for their economics to even come into play.
Well, they measure success really differently because even what you talked about, you wanted founders who'd at least taken a company from 0 to 1 million. Well, I've heard West Coast scoff at, oh, well, you only got a company to 10 million.
Yeah.
It's got to be big, really big for them to consider it, right? And even in the conversations I've had, I was talking to somebody about investment, and I asked how much money are you making? He's like, that's such a East Coast question. I was like, well, what do you mean? He's like, well, on the East Coast, you ask how much money are you making? What traction have you achieved? Mm-hmm. On the West Coast, they want to know how many users do you have? How many customers? Customers that may not be paying.
Right.
So knowing that, right, and even knowing where to take your deal.
That's right.
Your deal may not be an Southeast deal.
100%
might
true.
not be a deal.
And that's okay. And I've told a number of founders that the best thing I could tell you to do right now is get on a plane.
Right.
And I think that's okay. As we talk at the economic development level about, and at the state level about how to continue to support the ecosystem, we should be the best Charleston and the best South Carolina that we can be. Mm-hmm. We shouldn't be Boulder 2.0 or Austin 2.0.
Right.
We should just be the best us.
Right.
And if we do that, we're going to be successful.
So future, either for what you're doing or what Harbor Entrepreneur Center is doing or what you think for Charleston, what are some of the trends you see?
Well, I'm excited about Good Growth Capital, and so partners and I have come together, and we're raising a $20 million VC fund here and have made our first tranche of investments out of that fund. So I'm really excited about having, a professionally managed institutional fund here, a committed capital fund. I firmly believe that will start to unlock even out-of-market money to invest in some of the things here, and that now there's a peer firm that is put money in and place someone on the board and kind of can have that oversight. And I think that's one of the things that has prevented some of the out-of-market money to participate here. So I'm really excited about that. I think I mentioned the Harbor's 5-year home. I'm excited to have an anchor facility there to, be a hub for this kind of activity. Our mission from day one, and continues to be the case today, is just create a bunch of collision among the entrepreneur community. If we can provide a conduit to bang smart people around that know and they're motivated and they're capable, by definition, they're going to do amazing things. Mm-hmm. They're going to go solve problems, and they're going to be awesome. So we just want to continue that heat and that friction and build on what's been happening. Well,
and allowing people to build together. There's this concept of the garage and being by yourself, and most of the stories I hear, it's a happenstance connection somebody makes at a networking event or somewhere that helps them get over that hump, right? And being able to do that, to collaborate in space and learn those things.
And what I am fortunate, and anyone who wants to come and spend a day at the Harbor, you're welcome. The dialogue back and forth among people who are in there, and someone overheard a phone call or someone overheard people troubleshooting an issue, and they're like, hey, I just saw that same thing, let me jump in and help you. Or, hey, I use this system for that and it's great and you should check it out. Or, and when you might spend another 2 hours of your life researching, trying to figure out what to do, and someone comes in 10 seconds and says, hey, just try this. Play that out over and over and over again, day in, day out, over a couple of years, and all of a sudden you're going to get some more movement happening.
Yeah. So, and then do you see in Charleston the people, because there's a couple colleges located here. Yeah, are you seeing the trend of people who kind of leave college and decide they're going to go into entrepreneurship immediately, or are they mostly going somewhere and then deciding to start something after that?
Yeah, I wouldn't call it a trend. I mean, you do have that, and what the College of Charleston is doing with their ICAP program is really cool. But again, if you really dive into the majority of, let's just call it the non-sexy, non-glamorous entrepreneurship, right? Like, there's a reason the 22-year-old that comes out of college with the app sits on the Wall Street Journal cover, right? Because that's the anomaly. That's not the norm.
Right.
The norm is probably more someone like my path, where 10 years in an industry, got a Rolodex, got a couple of dollars in my pocket, understand how an industry works, sees a gap in it, and decides to go attack a solution there. That's the majority of what.
That's the majority of businesses
that actually.
I love those non-sexy ones that hanging out in an industrial park that do this little thing that you had no idea.
Right.
Yeah.
Very
cool.
And so going back, kind of to the guidance for companies that might be looking for money and stuff is, man, when you can have an industry that's accustomed to paying for something and they already have a line item on their budget to pay for, and you give them a better option to pay for, I love that. I mean, compared to do I need to create a new industry for this to work? Like, again, that takes a lot of time, that takes a lot of money, that takes a lot of users, and that's okay. But I do think around here and around the Southeast, there's just so much opportunity to build businesses that do real stuff for existing industry that can make us all win together.
When you were talking about the golf analogy, getting the money is what just gets you to the first tee, right? Well, then you've got to build the product, and then you've got to market it and get it off the shelf, and then you've got to sustain it. Like, this is a long game.
That's
it's
right.
Not just because you hit one of those hurdles, you got a long road.
That's right.
And that's my other sort of. There's all these like pop media, we have to redo this business in 24 hours. Like, that just never happens. Right? It's 24 months, 24 years, right? So it's a long game. It is such a long game. And
we use the term, it's used often, overnight success, 10 years in the making.
Right.
Most of the time someone's been grinding at that thing for years before they do an interview like this, or they get in the paper, or someone or they see the building go up and someone knows it. It's like, you didn't see the last 5 years of my life.
And you gloss over it, like, I was eating ramen noodles and whatever, but it really was part of it.
Yeah.
So, well, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
Likewise.
Yeah, it's great talking with John Osborne. He was with the Harbor Entrepreneur Center, founder of the Harbor Entrepreneur Center here in Charleston, South Carolina. If you haven't taken a chance to come up here and visit the beach and some of the restaurants and check out the startup scene, you should. Got a lot of really cool entrepreneurial stuff going on. You're listening to Build Your Best Business. I'm your host, Eric Holtzclaw. And until next time, what are you going to do to build your best business?